So yeah, I mean, if anybody out there is like me, I think, in the world of marketing and specifically digital marketing, websites often kind of get this reputation, or there's often this feeling around websites that you have to essentially choose between it looking really cool and having a really, really sleek design or it performing well in search engines. I think particularly in the SEO world recently, the last few years, with discussions around core web vitals, with the prominence of things like page speed, but also the importance of displaying sort of in-depth content. It can often feel like if you want to rank on Google, you need to kind of sacrifice some of that visual appeal. But do you really have to choose between having an eye-catching website and one that Google likes? Is it completely impossible to invest in design and also retain your technical compliance? Well, in this webinar, we've brought together two of our top experts here at the SEO Works. One is a technical SEO expert, one is a UX specialist, and they're here today to answer both of these questions and more. So essentially, together with their combined expertise, they are basically here today to show you and reassure you that it is possible to have a website that's liked by both your audience and search engines. So let's get to know them. So first of all, Carla, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Carla Moore, a senior SEO account manager here at the SEO Works, and I'll be the technical SEO specialist that'll be running you through the sort of more rankings and on-page content side of things, as well as the sort of page speed, core web vitals, and general page experience side of things today.
Amazing. Thanks, Carla. And Tom?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tom Blackhurst, web developer and UX specialist here at the SEO Works, and I'm here today to help you understand how to kind of build websites that are like really attention grabbing and also not too sacrificial on performance.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And my name's Alex Vince Myers. I'm the head of marketing here at SEO Works, and I'm basically here today just to facilitate the session. I'll let the experts share their expertise, and I'll sit back and learn something hopefully as well. We'll now crack on with looking into kind of what we're going to go through today. So for me, I think that an important kind of starting point really is to kind of bring everyone up to that same starting point of why are each of these things important in the first place? It's all well and good us starting saying, you want to be achieving both of these things, but let's just start by sort of understanding why both of these factors actually matter at all. So, Tom, if you want to start by taking us through why an eye-catching design matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. So, why does sort of design and obviously making your website really eye-catching matter for brand and for users, really? So, essentially, an eye-catching design of a site is critical for both the brand and the user of the website. It's not just one or the other, really. The website is the first thing that people as users see, and it's really responsible for that kind of all-important first impression of your brand. And it can really be a decision maker when it comes to essentially turning users into customers. As well as giving off this first impression, a stylish website helps to build brand strength and kind of the story behind any brand. In essence, it sort of is helping to build like a brand personality. In creating this kind of strong brand and personality will allow your company or business to kind of get one step ahead of your competitors, both on and offline, really. One way in which sort of eye-catching web design can allow you to gain like this competitive advantage is the way it kind of makes your users feel whilst using the site. So like a stylish and professional design will kind of immediately start to build trust with the user, especially compared to like a poorly designed site, really. Stylish sites tend to appear a bit more honest and appealing, whereas a poorly designed site can sometimes seem like a more aggressive, untrustworthy form of advertising, really. And not only from this kind of trusting point of view, but a stylish web design will offer the user a more pleasant and easy experience whilst they're navigating the site. And this is something we'll touch on a lot more later on. But this kind of pleases users and gives them a positive impression of brand. And also it's likely to encourage the users to come back as return users to your website.
So from the sort of ranking organically side, so why does that matter? So looking at it from a statistical perspective to kind of give you a bit of that wider context. So generally, when people decide to purchase a product or sort of go through with a service that you offer, more than 50% of the time, that journey starts with Google. So whether that's obviously them knowing what product they want and searching for it immediately, whether that's them being a bit closer to the top of the funnel, so a bit more unsure, looking up maybe how do I do XYZ thing, where can I find XYZ thing, not really as sure about the specific product that they require. Their journey kind of starts with that more inquisitive Google related step, and ranking organically is the way that you can reach them. Ranking organically also obviously has huge potential in terms of that ROI side of things, in that obviously the wider variety of keywords that you rank for, the less you have to pay for clicks in those areas, and you can obviously kind of refocus your campaign efforts elsewhere. And of course, linking back to kind of that point about trust and reassurance, the more times your company sort of appears for its related search terms, obviously the more those customers associate you with those terms, therefore kind of building up that knowledge of the company. So even if they come at you through the kind of more informational side of things, so how do I do XYZ thing, and then return to purchase later, they'll kind of have you in mind as you help them with that. So that's sort of why getting found on the search is definitely more important in terms of increasing that brand awareness than, for example, putting all of the budget into paid, for example.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. So yeah, I think, some of those points, will probably be familiar to a lot of you, but I think it's really important to remind everyone of that, because I think, it as you'll find out in today's webinar, like it can require work, kind of getting both of them to a very good level, but it is really important that you do that. And I think those points really catch that nicely. So yeah, I think we'll basically now look at maybe, okay, we know both of them are possible, and we obviously know we're here today to find out how to achieve both of them, but why is it actually that people think you can't? Like, obviously, this webinar, the reasons you've all registered for it, the reason we're doing it in the first place, these misconceptions obviously exist. So Tom, if you could take us through a little bit about why there might be misconceptions, or why people think you can't achieve both, that would be a really good sort of entry point.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously kind of thought process into having both a good looking site and an SEO performing site, it's not really a misconception, and it kind of will have been a very valid argument in years gone by. But right now, in terms of where we are, is this still the case? Sort of in previous years, like a flashy interactive website will have been kind of what we call heavy to build. So this essentially means lots of code will be needed in order to kind of have the required effect, essentially. This would have probably resulted in poor performing websites from a technical and therefore an SEO perspective. Many people kind of still believe that prioritizing design elements can hinder site performance, therefore having a negative impact on SEO and user experience. And this leads to this idea that a good looking site sacrifices functionality. There are some web trends still that exist that are performance affecting, such as parallax scrolling, large background video, and there's no escaping that. There might be, but we'll have a look at that later. We'll look at what could be done to help with the implementation of modern web trends a little bit later on. So some designs can kind of fall into this trap of being over-designed, where essentially a design team doesn't necessarily take into consideration the impact of kind of how some design elements will impact technically. When their focus is solely on aesthetics, SEO best practices often get forgotten about. So something like HTML structure will just sort of slide out the window. And this will result in a visually stunning website, but it can be really difficult for search engines to crawl and index effectively. Smaller businesses sometimes kind of had this feeling that essentially there's a choice between good design and effective SEO. And whether this is down to cost or the time it takes to achieve both, but we kind of think that when there's a real strong teamwork and a good, strong plan in place, this doesn't need to be the case. So if you're using this team of experts, there doesn't really need to be a trade-off between the two. There currently also seems to be a misconception that on the SEO side, it's solely technical performance and about keyword integration. And at the minute, it's just not the case. So user experience and engagement is becoming a crucial influencing sort of key metric that search engines are really starting to consider when it comes to ranking websites. So for example, like a positive user experience influenced not only by the technical page speed, but also the ease of navigation and the way it looks and the way that the users can find what they need on the site. This will lead to an overall better engagement, which in turn will tell search engines that our site is really valuable and really relevant.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Tom. So yeah, I think, that's a lot of food for thought as we go into the kind of delivery aspect of today's webinar about, some of these points might be very familiar to a lot of you. Like there might be people here today that, have these exact misconceptions. And that's really what we want to hope everybody gets out of today's session, which is to go away with maybe some of these myths dispelled and a practical solution of how to actually see those myths dispelled on your websites, on the websites that you guys manage. So yeah, we'll now crack on with some delivery essentially. So how this will work is we're going to look at 3 different kind of aspects of a website and of your websites. So first of all, we're going to look at website structure. We're then going to look at approaches you can take and people's experience on the website, things like that. Essentially different areas we feel you can make a real difference from a sort of UX and tech SEO perspective. So yeah, to kick on, we're going to start with the structure of your website. So yeah, over to you guys.
So from the sort of rankings side of things, prioritizing content hierarchy in terms of structure is something that I think gets quite often overlooked. So often people kind of think about getting the keywords and all the top level headings. But what you need to also really think of is kind of the journey of the page and getting users what they need as quickly as possible. So to kind of put it in a bit more of a simple way, content hierarchy is the practice of organizing the page's content depending on how important it is. So obviously starting with kind of the most important content. So that would be, for example, if it was a product page, you wouldn't want to start with sort of use cases of the product, for example, or any FAQs. You'd more likely want to lead with maybe an image of the product, opportunities to purchase and opportunities to obviously inquire if it was a service, for example. So kind of starting with that key information that answers the query as quickly as possible. So common issues that we tend to see in this area would be things like large images, like large banner images, for example, that push that key information below the fold. So users have to scroll and Google kind of can't determine that topic early on. A lack of clear, fast options to convert. So for example, if you have a product and it's got the image, it's got the quantity, things like that, but there's no add to cart button, and users kind of have to take an extra step to inquire about the product, for example. Or if it's from a more service-led website, a lack of sort of booking options or key service information, like the USPs of the service, for example, being too low down on the page. So all of these common factors can lead to the user bouncing, so leaving the site, meaning that then obviously Google is likely to interpret that data as that the content just simply isn't useful, even if the content might be high quality and well executed. Users obviously leaving the page without fulfilling that kind of engagement or conversion intent will lead to Google then determining that the content should not rank for its chosen query. So apologies, first of all, for showing a piece of cake so close to lunchtime for everyone, but this was sort of the first example that I'd thought of, as it's an example that we all refer to in the SEO department quite commonly when it comes to sort of content hierarchy and that on-page experience. So recipe websites, we've all sort of had cases where we're just looking to cook something basically, and what we're instead met with is a case like on the right-hand side, where we're met with instances like this one had about 4 images and about 5 paragraphs of text kind of mentioning the value of a cake and their sort of personal experiences with cooking it and their sort of memories, which is all lovely content and definitely would be good in sort of the bottom half of the page, perhaps in FAQs or kind of a more diary style post, but it doesn't really necessarily serve the intent, which is to find the recipe. So the left-hand side offers a much better user experience insofar as it condenses everything you need into that first frame. So it has an option to save the recipe, cooking details, even reviews as a trust signal. And then immediately below that, it has the ingredients and nutritional information, followed by the directions to cook it, which is obviously kind of the order of the page that you'd expect to see to help you conduct the task of actually baking the cake effectively. So this is sort of a practical example of what we mean by content hierarchy.
Brilliant. So I'm going to, start having a look about structuring pages for really just for technical performance from kind of a development standpoint. So like a well thought out and considered page structure it essentially lays the foundations for a site that's going to perform well on both a technical and an SEO perspective, as well as improving the overall user experience on the website. It's important to understand how to achieve this strong foundation, and really it all starts with a really good solid plan. And the best way to achieve this is to take the time to review and understand what the currently existing structure looks like and how we can improve this with both the users and performance in our minds. And we'd normally do this as part of kind of a user experience review where we produce a kind of a reworked sitemap and wireframes for key page templates across the website. And these are the type of things that we'd initially consider when we start piecing together site and page structures. First up, I'm going to start with the page structure and understand how to piece together pages that are going to perform really well technically. And one thing to consider is page length. And there is quite a lot to consider really for such a seemingly minor element. So short web pages offer benefits such as shorter load times due to having to load less content in really, and fewer resource draining elements such as images and scripts. And then the faster load time will sort of help result in a better user experience and be liked by search engines as information is being provided really quickly. Also, shorter pages can provide the user with really concise information that's easier to understand in a shorter time, leading to an improvement in engagement and reduced bounce rates, and therefore encouraging users to kind of click through and explore a little bit more of your website. However, there are other things to consider when thinking about page depth. And as much as short pages can be beneficial technically, they still need to provide comprehensive and really valuable information to the user. And if pages are too short and they don't satisfy the full intent of the user, they'll provide a really frustrating experience and won't then perform well in our search rankings. So when considering page structure from a layout perspective, it's incredibly important to consider the context that they're going to actually be used in. So, for example, a landing page could benefit from being that bit shorter and direct, giving the user less to think about before actually converting. However, some pages could benefit from a little bit more length, such as in-depth articles and resource pages that are kind of intended to be a little bit more informational. And this balancing act is a really key part of building a website, and it can often be overlooked in web build projects. So now we've got a kind of an understanding of page structure from a layout and design perspective. How do we actually go about building these pages in a structural manner for them to perform technically? So there's again a lot to consider when it comes to actually doing a development of a web page based on this well-structured design that we have. And as a developer, there are various methods that we can work with in order to produce these really well-structured pages. And first up is kind of the use of what we call semantic HTML. And this is a really quick win when it comes to page structure. So we can use tags across our page that actually provide meaning and context to the content, which allows search engines to understand the structure of the pages from behind the scenes, really. And heading tags is another kind of consideration point in structure, as they help define the hierarchy, as Carla's mentioned. They'll help the users to understand the importance of sections and kind of efficiently navigate through your content. Page structure then, in terms of development terms, does not just consider the layout down the actual visible web page. And we also have to consider something called the document object model tree, or the DOM tree. So this is essentially how many levels deep the structure is of the page. And the more this grows, the more a site can be penalized for having an excessive DOM size. And sometimes when we work with third-party code and third-party themes, this is kind of taken out of our control, and therefore will probably end up having more of a negative impact on SEO. So the correct loading and positioning of elements is another method that will have kind of a major impact of web pages, and especially visual ones. So a lazy loading technique will take the strain off our first load by delaying the loading of kind of unnecessary resources that are on the page, and we'll then load them in a little bit later on when they're actually required. However, we've got to be careful with this because it's absolutely essential that hero images and scripts that are needed above the fold, tracking scripts, for example, they need to be excluded from this sort of functionality as they'll have a really negative impact on the performance of the page. Mobile friendliness is also absolutely essential for developing a really well-structured web page. And it's key that pages have a responsive structure that adapts to the variety of different devices that there are these days. And a site that is well-structured, well-considered, well-designed for mobile will not only provide a better user experience, but also rank higher. So some older methods of mobile building simply used to take desktop elements and hide them on mobile and vice versa. And this methodology kind of doubled the amount of content that we're providing on page, therefore having a negative impact on performance. Whereas with more modern techniques, such as a media query, we're allowed to only kind of load one element for all device sizes and essentially just change the style and the structure of it depending on the screen size. And this keeps our structure really slimline and our performance levels really high. So these development methodologies are all possible when using a knowledgeable development team, and is another reason why custom builds are far more beneficial than using an off-the-shelf theme, for example. So a custom build will allow us to apply all of the before mentioned methodologies and a thoroughly considered structure to allow us to kind of develop the best possible sites for your businesses. So then moving on to site structure. Site structure is incredibly important and has to be considered right at the start of a web build with the creation of hopefully a well-informed site map and on the back of a really well-considered planning phase. And this is where a development team and an SEO team benefits from working really closely together, as they can kind of build this site hierarchy that has a clear and logical flow and will help our users and search engines understand the relationship between actual content sections. So site hierarchy and kind of the categorization of our content then can also help us to build a strong and understandable URL structure across the site as a whole. And the URL structure, again, kind of provides the user and search engines with context about the site. Descriptive and relevant URLs will enhance kind of click-through rates from search engine results pages and contribute to an overall better user experience. And not only this, but having a clear URL structure will help users and crawlers understand the layout as a whole, and therefore the journey that they should be taking to their end goal. They can also help reduce technical errors such as broken links or 404 pages, as we've got a more organized navigational path to help guide users and stop them kind of getting lost within the site infrastructure. So it's clear to see the importance of site structure, but it's not the only aspect of a site that helps to improve its usability and then its performance.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Tom and Carla, for that first section. Yeah, really, really informative. I think, there's so much there to go at already, and that's only one facet that we're looking into. As I said, another important reason why today's session is recorded. You can go back and revisit a lot of those tips that we went through, whether it's you that handles the SEO and development, or that's somebody else. You can share those tips with them. So we actually have a question through from Connie, which I will ask now. So cool. So I think this might be one for Carla. So Connie asks, why is our site not coming up when searching on Google? Basically, it seems that when she runs a site colon search, they come up, but when they search their brand name, they don't come up. I think I've got that right. So yeah, Carla, is there any reason why that might be?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. So obviously, with the fact that you come up when the site search is obviously related to kind of how the pages themselves are structured, but I think it's something that would definitely need a bit more context to answer in detail. Like, for example, kind of what else is coming up in the meantime. Like, is it competitors? Is it your kind of social media? Another factor as well is if your Google My Business is linked to the site, that's a good way to kind of get yourselves coming up for the brand. But I think it also depends as well on what the brand name is. Like, sometimes you find that when the brand name is also like the name of an object or the name of another brand or something, it can be kind of a competing level of brand awareness, but without that sort of extra context, I can't really answer it effectively. But if you feel free to kind of drop as an email or something with a bit more detail, we can obviously kind of get back to you with more detailed insights. But just off the kind of top of my head, those are the things that could be impacting that.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Cool. We've got a question. I think this one will probably be for Tom. This is from Tom. Tom says, I'm using Webflow currently, something that was inherited when he joined the company. It's great for site creation and management without development costs. But is it generally considered good or bad for the things that you mentioned in terms of performance, speed, and unnecessary code?
Yeah, thanks. Interesting question, actually, because obviously Webflow is sort of fits into this kind of modern day sort of web builder pattern, really. And yeah, like you mentioned, they can be really good for like site creation, content management, stuff like this, but they do tend to be a little excessive with the kind of code and the size of the pages that they create. They can be really inflated just due to they're not really the best in terms of picking and choosing what is used on certain pages. So you might get all of the code that's needed to build the whole site just dumped onto one page. So therefore we're going to have a load of unused scripts, a load of unused styles, and this will have then a negative impact on performance. Obviously, a lot of these builders do, or as far as I'm aware, they come with kind of performance enhancing options that could help reduce this. But kind of off the shelf, they are likely to be slightly worse for performance than say a custom built website that has been specifically thought about the loading of elements, essentially. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. We've actually had a flurry of questions in, so we maybe have to either come back to some of these later on, or we can drop an email to people. I'll probably just go with one more. So I'll tell you what, if you can, Tom, Amy would like you just to explain the DOM term just a little bit more, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's possible. We could be here for hours, but I'll try and keep it short. So when thinking about like the development of a web page, obviously it's not just what you see on the page. There's a whole load of code that goes into actually building this. And a lot of sites that you may see are obviously, they tend to be what we call containerized, where essentially all of the elements sit inside smaller and smaller containers that will like make up what the actual look is of the website. So this kind of unseen part, the actual code, we always use it in kind of it's like you're sort of tabbed in a way. So all of your elements get further and further towards the right-hand side of the page. And the DOM essentially just describes this kind of tree, really. So we'll start off at the very top in terms of the hierarchy, which will more often than not just be the HTML tag of the page. And then within that, we've got other tags that actually make up our site. So we've got a body, we'll have a head element, we'll have a footer element. And these are all kind of parts of the structure of the page. And the bigger that DOM gets, the more we're loading onto the page and the more code we've written onto the page, which is obviously negative for performance because we're just trying to load a lot more. Other than that, the DOM it's just kind of a measurement term to try and allow us as developers to control the size of pages and to allow us to control the structure and the hierarchy, really. And other than that, there's not too much to say without going overly complex, really.
No, that's perfect, Tom. Thank you. And yeah, hopefully that explains a little bit more, Amy. So yeah, really, really sorry. I know there's a few questions that we haven't answered from this section. We are going to move on just because of time. If we have time later on, we can revisit them. As I said, if we don't manage to please do email them over to us and we will make sure everyone gets a response. So yeah, we'll now move on to section 2. So we've obviously talked about the structure of the website. We talked about that kind of, that like really stepped back element of the whole thing. We're now going to go a little bit closer to home and talk about the website experience. So the experience the user might have on the website and things you can do about the website's experience that will help you to grab attention and rankings simultaneously. So yeah, let's crack on with section 2.
So starting off with sort of one of the key areas then of that sort of actual tangible on-page experience, which would be page speed and core web vitals. So core web vitals, essentially, in case you kind of don't know, to summarize, are a series of metrics that are designed with the purpose of sort of assessing how your site performs in terms of user experience overall. So what they kind of cover is factors like the initial load speeds, how quickly it loads when the user first reaches the site, any layout changes when they're on the site, so things like the page shifting or maybe scrolling them back up to the top while they're kind of halfway through the page. And then the responsiveness of the page. So obviously when users are kind of clicking on things, are they performing as they're supposed to? What it also covers is the accessibility side of things now as well. So things like, is your page configured appropriately for screen readers to read, for example? Is the contrast level appropriate? As in, can the user actually kind of read what you've put on the page? Or is it sort of a bright background with kind of dark text on, something like that? And some of the sort of common issues that you might see crop up in a page speed insights report on Google, for example, are things like cumulative layout shifts. So obviously those sort of unexpected layout changes when scrolling, pages shifting or kind of taking you back to previous points. Interaction to next pane issues. So this basically tracks sort of the responsiveness to those user inputs on the page. So things like clicking buttons, clicking in-text links, and kind of checking whether they take them to where they're supposed to or whether they don't do anything at all. And then first contentful pane is another kind of common one, which essentially describes a delay between when the page first starts loading, so when the user comes onto the site or onto that particular page, and then the time between that and sort of when the content actually becomes visible on the screen to the user. So things like images, text, buttons, and any other sort of visual elements on the page appearing on the screen. So why do these things matter? Why does page speed matter for SEO? So obviously you can do those kind of off-page based actions, so like optimizing the metadata and getting the keywords in there, which is fantastic, gets us ranking for those key terms and sends the user to the site. But the positive page experience, whilst also helping with that, is what keeps them there. So one of the reasons why this has become so important recently as well is with the introduction of mobile first indexing to Google. So essentially meaning that if your mobile usability is poor, your rankings are likely to be affected overall just because of the importance that Google places on mobile due to the amount of users that are kind of searching queries through mobile and browsing generally on the internet via mobile. So the faster a page loads and the more effectively it responds to that user input, the more likely they are to stay on the page. And I think this is something that you have to sort of put yourself in the user's shoes about, because I'm sure we've all kind of had an instance where we're trying to do something on a website or we've come onto it, it doesn't load, and we're likely to be frustrated and click off and then obviously look somewhere else, which is the key there because you're losing that valuable business. Whereas if obviously the user stays on the page, scrolls through it, interacts with the content, it signals to Google that the page's content is relevant, as well as providing that good user experience, making it more likely to choose the page to rank for your target queries. And ultimately, again, to put it in the more sort of transactional terms, the better the user experience, the more likely they are to convert or continue their on-site journey to other informational content, related products and services, things like that, as well as keep you in mind to revisit the site in the future based off that positive user experience that they've had. So again, in those more sort of transactional terms, taking it into the general space that your business operates in, essentially, fast loading website with responsive elements leads to more interaction, better rankings, and then obviously what we want to see is better conversions. Having a slower site obviously gives competitors opportunities in the space, because users may kind of click off your site and the next site might be a search competitor or even a sort of brick and mortar competitor with an online presence as well. So what you can kind of do to make a start in this area is take a look at the search landscape. So seeing who else kind of ranks for your target queries and analyzing your site against theirs. This will kind of help you determine if site speed is something you even need to devote a lot of resource to. So what I essentially mean by this is, if competitors outperform you in terms of page speed, improving your performance could be kind of the difference between you not ranking at all or ranking kind of just below page one of those top spots to being pushed into the ranking spots, because you are providing that better user experience when the users kind of come onto that site. But if, however, you're performing very well, or kind of there's not really historically great page speed performance in your competitive space, perhaps where you would like to spend more of your time would be something like optimizing content and kind of on-page factors that help you get found and increase your sort of general market share. But ultimately, it could still be something that you need to work on, because as with that sort of page journey that we talked about on the content hierarchy, if there's any sort of friction, users are ultimately likely to go look somewhere else.
Awesome. So I'm going to kind of step away a little bit from the technicalities and kind of start off by explaining what we think a user experience is really, and why it's such a crucial part of modern day web design and development. So I kind of like to think of UX as this overall experience that a user has when they're interacting with your website. And it's formed by a combination of CRO, UI, and usability, essentially. And it means this is how we're trying to make a user feel when they come to interact with the site. And nowadays, it's such a key marker to the success or the failure of any website build. However, it's got to be said that user experience is a completely personal metric. So what I'm trying to say here is that a website can kind of provide multiple experiences to every single person that visits the website, and it's not just solely one experience. Going back into kind of development mode, there's like no way of building an actual user experience, but we're essentially going to be trying to build an area for experiences to be had by all of our users. And the experience that a user then has on the site becomes a metric, as the better the experience, the more likely they are to be engaged, and therefore the more likely they will then be to convert. And the longer in the engagement, the search engines will kind of interpret this as a sign of quality, and the site's value will really start to grow. A site with good user experience will essentially make the user think a little bit less. They'll kind of have their hand held during their visit to this site and throughout the whole decision-making process. And everything's going to be clearly outlined for them, really nicely signposted, and this will kind of ensure that conversions become a much more regular occurrence, really. Users enjoy visiting websites that not only provide a good experience, but they're then more likely to return if they've had that enjoyment from a user standpoint. And a user's enjoyment can kind of be made up of multiple elements, but primarily visual appeal and the ease of which the website can be used. And these are the two of our most kind of crucial aspects of user experience. Speaking of visual appeal, it's kind of a really interesting topic in terms of UX, as a lot of people tend to believe that the user experience is just simply the way that our websites look. And this couldn't be further from the truth. So the UI, or the actual design of the interface, is just one element that makes up the overall experience that a user gets when browsing your site. Sometimes a really pleasant, interactive, and animated design produces a visually stunning effect that the users enjoy actually seeing, but they might not be easy to actually use when it comes to what we're trying to get them to do. So some sites that produce the best user experience aren't actually the best looking, but they are absolutely perfect for what they need to do. Sites that allow our users to kind of achieve their intent quickly provide the best experiences. So we've got no needless distractions. We've got no over-designed elements, no technical issues, no blockers. We're just building simply conversion machines that users can use to achieve their goals in as fewer clicks as possible. And I'm going to take the words of Steve Krug, who's a pretty big name in UX, of "Don't make me think." And if there's any motto to go by, this is the one I'd recommend for when thinking about how your user wants to feel when using the website. So sites need to be built for the brand they're advertising. And sites with the best, most trusting experiences tend to keep and tell the story from offline marketing and continue this online. And this links back to what I said earlier about the strength of brand. And the user experience can therefore be very different depending on the type of brand that you are. So some companies will want to impress their users from a design perspective, and others will want to impress them with their uniformity and their ability to meet the user's intentions really quickly. And as mentioned previously, the user experience is not a flat metric. It's super changeable, and it's very much situation or brand specific. So I'm now going to discuss an area which gets forgotten about in the building of a site. And this is how crucial it is to actually understand who your users are and what they intend to achieve on your site. And this is where research or user research is such an important element of our web build process. So we do things like creating user personas, which is when we look to rebuild or repurpose your site in the best way to gain a full understanding of who your users are. And once we know who the users are and what they want to do, we can start building the site in a way that's actually useful for them, not just in a way that we think will be useful for them. And this all stems from in-depth research. So UX can be considered from many other angles and not just the way in which the website looks. Let's take something like content, for example, something non-design and non-visual. User-centric content is a great way to take our user research and improve our website without thinking about design or layout. So content written with certain users or our users in mind in order to guide them through the site and towards their end goal is probably the most simple and effective way of improving the overall user experience. And the content should be really easy for users to understand, avoiding any real complexity and answering the questions that they might have about the product or the service on offer. So content is one area of focus for UX without necessarily thinking about design. And so is navigation. Obviously, navigation is a design element, but in this case, it's not. So it's such an interesting and important area of a website and can be seriously well informed on the back of a user research project. We can look at things like naming conventions, best practices, and journey continuation when it comes to actually getting users around our site. And this can be done by looking at the way we, number one, nest navigation items, how we include navigatable blocks in our actual page content, and then how we can carry on journeys that might otherwise have come to an end by potentially running into errors. And this is where my lovely example here of an error page content becomes really important, as it's a great way to keep users engaged and get them back on track if we need to. So now we know how to start creating a great user experience. It's important to maintain this and ensure it kind of continues to work through us into the future. And the best and only really way to do this is to test and just keep testing. So constantly receiving feedback about what's working on your site and what isn't allows the site to keep adapting to what the users are actually doing on the website. So using tracking tools and UX kind of methodologies, such as a focus group, to actually receive real user feedback will help the experience of any site and then allow for the implementation of kind of technical improvements or anything that might need changing to suit our users' needs.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much again. Yeah, I mean, that's another one where, there's just so much to go out there. And I think, in a nice way as well, I think, it really shows just how much you can control and you can go away and do after today's session, which is really, really nice. I think, sometimes with these things, there'll be very specific and very difficult fixes. But I mean, Tom and Carla there have given you a lot to go at. So hopefully you're all feeling a bit more reassured about achieving both these things. So once again, we've had quite a few questions through. So I'm going to try and pick as many as I can. As I said, we are running slightly behind, so we might not get round to all of them. The first one, which I think gels really, really nicely with what Carla was talking about, is from Amy, who says, our largest contentful paint is 2.7 seconds and is showing red on page speed insights. What's the easiest way to rectify this?
So this kind of, again, sort of depends on largest contentful paint sort of split into 3 different stages of kind of how the element loads. So it should hopefully give you insight into kind of which one of these is causing the problem, which is a fairly recent thing that PageSpeed Insights has implemented. So once you kind of have a look at that, you can then drill down into, from a development perspective, how to fix that. So a lot of the time it might be like render delay, for example. A great kind of, especially if it's an image as well, a great obviously kind of best practice across the board is to obviously make sure that the file size is as small as possible as well. But insofar as kind of how you fix it in this specific instance, again, I would look at that specific insight that it gives you on Google PageSpeed Insights, for example, because it will kind of say which stages of the loading cycle are loading effectively and which are not. But yeah, it could be a case of either render delay, or sometimes, for example, it's lazy loaded, so loaded kind of later on when it doesn't need to be, and things like that, which obviously kind of leads to elements appearing when users scroll, for example. So again, it just kind of depends on your specific use case, but I definitely recommend having a look on PageSpeed Insights to kind of drill down into that in a bit more detail.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carla. I'll tell you what, we'll do one more, because I think also a few of the other ones you might find might get answered a little bit later in the session as well. So we'll do one more question now, and then we'll move on, and we can always come back to other ones. So this is one for Tom. It's on the sort of UX side of things. So Mel has said they have a sort of information-only website. You can't sort of buy a product there without interacting with the sales team. And so they're struggling to decide if a short visit to that site means a lack of interest, or just that the user has found what they need quickly and therefore it's actually a positive experience. What's a good way to kind of measure or analyze which one of this is occurring?
Yeah, cool. Again, kind of a super interesting question, and kind of links back to what I was saying about understanding your users and their actual intent, really. Having an idea of what they want to do on your site will allow you to essentially measure it better. So a good way to kind of measure this is just understanding what you want a conversion to look like on your site. So whether you want them to submit a contact form, whether you want a phone call to the sales team, or another form, like a download, another form of conversion, that's kind of the best way to understand whether the users are having a successful experience on your site. And obviously, like I mentioned before, testing, getting feedback on the site is another way to actually analyze this and see whether the users are getting what they need out of your website. So I'm hoping that answers that one.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's great. And I think also there's a section slightly later on, I can't remember who covers it, where we talk about kind of things like tools like Hotjar and other tools that we can use to track what people are doing on the site. So I think that will also provide clarity there. So yeah, we'll move on. As I said, sorry if we haven't managed to answer your question. We'll please do drop us an email, or we'll cover it later on. So the next section looks at the website approach. So this is so we've talked about structure, we've talked about experience people are having on it. What we're going to talk about in this section is things that you can actually do to a live site already. So a lot of the things we've covered so far might look at the planning, or the more kind of sort of technical side of things on that angle. This is more sort of approaches you can take right now on your website to kind of hopefully improve some of these things. So yeah, without further ado, we'll crack on with section 3.
So obviously back to a slightly more technical side, and how we can actually apply technical fixes to a live site to help them kind of perform better. So really the dream for every kind of website is to have one that looks stunning, has loads of interactivity, lots of really nice high quality imagery, potentially some animation, but we also want it to perform well. So all of these kind of visual elements will hopefully kind of be features in a high quality design that's aimed at serving our users' needs. And as a developer, it's kind of my job to understand how it's possible to balance all of these elements and come up with technical solutions, and not the glamorous kind of ones that your users will see, but the actual technical ones that are going to sit in the background and make your site run efficiently. So here's some ways in which we can kind of ensure that performance is maintained on a site. So first up is sort of looking at scripts and styles and how we load them, really. And it's a really simple way in which we can kind of ensure that we're in control of what's loaded onto our webpage. So it links back to what I was talking about with kind of off-the-shelf themes and web builders. But the best way to load scripts and styles into a site is to only kind of call them when needed. And this means that we don't have huge amounts of unused code loading onto all of our pages. And a problem that we do see a lot more often than we would like to. Once we're kind of in control of that code that we're loading onto the page, we can actually compress it down, meaning that our files and pages are a whole lot smaller than they need to be. It means there's less data being transferred between the browser and the server, and there are less requests being made, leading to a more seamless browsing experience for our users. So the loading of JavaScript or script files is always really difficult to stay on top of and ensure that performance remains high, really. Primarily because modern day web builders and CMSs are really reliant on a variety of third-party codes and libraries. Fortunately, we can kind of use some methodologies in order to defer scripts and in some situations asynchronously load them onto our pages. So normally the loading of a script will actually pause the rendering out of a web page. So when we load a page, the HTML needs to load first, but a script at the top will stop that loading, and that's when we'll often see like a delay in that page actually rendering onto our screens. However, the tags that I've mentioned will kind of allow us to change this. So an asynchronous load will grab a script file whilst the page is rendering, and only once the download is complete will the pause happen to pop the scripts into the page. Deferring the scripts will allow us to wait until the whole page is loaded, really, and then it'll load the script in. So you will see no kind of delay in how the actual primary content of the page loads in. This is our preferred method unless there are scripts, as mentioned earlier, that we rely on immediately as the page renders. So image optimization is another way in which we can control visual elements without sacrificing our performance, and something that you touched on, Carla, with the CLS discussion. But we've touched on lazy loading, so we know how that benefits performance. However, actually getting our images prepared for load will enable us to use really high quality imagery that makes our site stand out from the competitors. Methods such as loading images in browser-friendly formats, defining set widths and set heights to avoid shifts, and actually rendering image size options with picture tags to ensure that we are only serving the right size of image for the relevant screen. All of these will kind of have huge impacts on the overall performance of the site. Here at the SEO Works, we only kind of build custom sites, and this again links back to having the benefit of being able to control what we use on the site. The huge player in the lack of performance on most sites is the over-reliance on libraries. We've already seen that there are some methods involved in delaying these scripts loading, but it's not always possible. So this is where building a site from scratch allows us to pick and choose what external libraries we actually rely on, and therefore the size of things that we're bringing into the page. And more often than not, we'll be able to write a kind of a custom script that's maybe a tenth of the size of the full library that would be able to do exactly what we need it to do, and will just save us a whole load of space and time. So typography is massive in terms of brand, and obviously it's kind of massive in terms of how we load a web page as well. So loading in font files, it seems like a really minor task and just something that happens, but it really does have an impact on our load speed. So best practices in terms of development point of view is to limit these brand font choices to kind of 2 or 3 at the very maximum, and then be really clever with how we load and preload font files, and potentially working with something that we call a variable font file. And this is essentially a house for a lot of variations of the same font in terms of thickness and style. And it allows us to switch between all these styles of fonts in one file rather than loading in one file per style. Now into slightly more heavy working stuff, and let's think about the server. So what is the server? It's something that keeps our site running and actually provides a site for your users to see. And it's kind of critical that we choose the correct server and size to keep the site running smoothly. Having enough space to store all of our site files seems really obvious, but it's often overlooked in underperforming sites. Moving back to imagery, we've talked a lot about it already this session, but here's a little bit more. So we could take our imagery and store it elsewhere, and we'd free up a load of valuable site and server resource and pull the images into the site from an external location. This is what a CDN can do. So this is a content delivery network that essentially distributes content across multiple servers in different locations and grabs the requested content and displays it to our users. And the benefit of using a CDN is that you'll have a lot faster load times, you'll reduce the server load, and will improve the reliability and availability of the content that we're trying to serve, because we're not reliant on that one server. This will ensure that kind of you've got uninterrupted access to media content served really, really quickly. So obviously, a lot of these technical applications won't ever be relevant to you unless you're in the development stage, but they're really worth knowing and worth having a basic understanding of the considerations that are actually made during the development cycle.
So how then, when in terms of thinking about getting these kind of changes that we've discussed on the site, or kind of not maybe knowing where to start, what to prioritize, how can you actually kind of test your current site design's impact on SEO and user experience, or how can you test the changes you've made to kind of improve that? So the first kind of tool that I touched on a little bit previously would be Page Speed Insights. So this is obviously a free Google tool, and it gives you insights into those metrics that we talked about in relation to page speed, input responsiveness, and accessibility on desktop and mobile, and gives you kind of guides into how to fix each one and some actionable insights to kind of take on each individual kind of page that you test, or on the kind of site as a whole. And then also you can use, as another Google tool, Search Console, which gives you insights into kind of groups of pages, not individual pages, that are experiencing similar issues regularly on those key Core Web Vitals metrics. So largest contentful pane, which is the largest image, video, or kind of an element like a block of text that's visible when the user first views the site, or when, depending on what kind of display window that they're in. Interaction to next pane, and cumulative layout shift. Microsoft Clarity as well is, or Hotjar as well is another example of this, is a kind of more user experience specific tool. So this one's really great because you can get live kind of on the page details. So it gives you data analytics into kind of how the user interacts with your site. You can view heat maps, so kind of showing you where users have dropped off on the page, bits they've got to or not got to, elements they've interacted with or elements they've ignored. And you can even kind of view anonymized screen recordings of kind of how users are interacting with the site. And it'll track kind of when they've completed key events like bookings maybe, or form submissions, for example. So you can really inform any changes that you make on those real-time user insights as well, which will kind of help you decide if it's useful to funnel effort into things like issues flagged on Page Speed Insights, because obviously if users aren't kind of running into that specific thing as a source of friction, there might be something else that requires more detailed attention. And then you can also, so before you've even kind of gone live with these changes, you can do a little bit of A/B testing or split testing. So helping to kind of test the effectiveness of different placements of buttons, or maybe different content layouts. And it's a form of testing where you kind of push a couple versions of a page live to different users, and then kind of get sort of like a focus group, get kind of feedback from analytics in terms of like the way that users have interacted with the pages, and then you can make an informed decision based on which one drives more engagement or conversions as to which one you kind of run with on the live site.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think as I said, there's been so much identified throughout today's session. And I mean, that one section alone has so much stuff that you can go away, whether you're within an internal SEO team or you manage the SEO. All of those different tools Carla just mentioned will be a fantastic starting point for you in terms of identifying maybe where your issues lie. But equally as well, like those things that Tom talked us through there, like if you have a developer resource or somebody internally that handles that, you need to be asking them about the status of a lot of those things. Because I mean, something that stuck out to me as well, something as simple as the number of fonts being loaded on your website, very, very easy to correct. But, as an internal marketer, I know how us marketers like typography. You know, it might be that you have a bunch of excess fonts being loaded there that's really slowing your site down. So yeah, a load of really, really good stuff to go out there. And thank you very, very much, Tom and Carla, for going in there. I've noticed a few people have to dash off at the turn of the hour. That's fine. Thank you very much for coming. But yeah, we'll crack on with one question that came from this section, which is from Amy. I think Carla or Tom could answer this. So either of you guys feel free. But basically, Amy has asked, is there kind of a rough guideline on image size in terms of compressing them? Is there something that they need to be aiming for before uploading images to their website?
Yeah, I can take this one. So it's obviously, I mean, it's a question we get from a lot of clients actually. So in terms of size, no. It's a simple answer. We're kind of, I tend to look at images just in terms of the kind of the aspect ratio of the actual area that they're meant to fit in. So kind of a long banner image, obviously we want to be wider than it is tall. And obviously square images, keep them square. Rectangular ones, keep them rectangular. In terms of actual space size, we like to try and keep images around 0.5 MB at the very, very maximum. Obviously, any more than that, we're starting to load like 4K resolution images onto a site, which are just going to be no use at all, really, in terms of website. And then once we actually get them on the site, even if they are a little bit too big, there are tools that we can use to actually really compress them down and save a lot of size that way. So just a quick wrap up, obviously, just like think about the aspect ratio. Don't make them too big. We don't need 4,000 pixel images on sites because no screens are that big. And then obviously think about using compression tools on the CMS of your choice that will help you control them.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. That 500 kilobyte number is now in everybody's head to try and get below. All right, cool. We'll crack on then because we're on to the last section now. So obviously we've gone through all the different ways that you can achieve both. But what you might remember from way at the start of the webinar is, one or two hints here and there that actually maybe there's an instance where, there are exceptions to this rule. Now, some of you might be sat there, with your respective websites and businesses and actually might think that actually one of these things is maybe more important than the other. And whilst that's not that common, we do want to identify that does sometimes happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some SEO things that absolutely need to be definitely focused on in spite of design even. And then Tom is also going to take us through some examples of businesses that maybe need to focus more on design than SEO. Here are a couple of exceptions to the rule. So we'll crack on.
Yep. So when to kind of choose SEO over design then? So I've split this into a couple of areas. So firstly, kind of looking at that content and sort of user journey side of things. So obviously heading structure, as we've discussed a fair bit, myself and Tom, kind of throughout the different sections, making sure that obviously you kind of follow that clear hierarchical structure with the H1 at the top of the page, with others kind of following them in order. So the H1 obviously kind of describing the key topic of the page, so including the keyword, with others then kind of following them in a topical order, as well as a sequential one, so H1, H2, H3. So what we kind of tend to see from the design point of view that we kind of have to talk people down from is sort of having something that you want to be quite large on the page, perhaps as the H1, even though it doesn't kind of accurately describe the topic of the page. So in that case, heading font sizes can obviously be changed from a design point of view, but the actual hard kind of coded semantic element of the H1 should always describe the page clearly, because it helps Google and users understand the content of the page and the way the topic kind of runs. On that similar note as well, touching again on content hierarchy, just making sure that user can access information like product blocks and relevant calls to action as high up as possible without kind of that being sacrificed by large image elements, for example, kind of at the top of the page. Getting to the point, again, on a similar note, So allowing Google and the user to quickly determine the page's relevance to them and what actions they should kind of take on the page. So whether that's convert or maybe scroll down to get a bit more information. And then as well, in terms of the more user journey side of things, keeping your navigation simple. So having menus that clearly describe the links of the pages that they're leading to, as well as things like breadcrumbs, can obviously help not only the user to kind of track their journey through the site and go back to relevant pages, it also helps Google to understand from an internal linking perspective the relationship between the pages. So while you might necessarily see breadcrumbs as a potentially negative design element, they don't have to be that big, and they can obviously make this large difference in those two areas. So then from the kind of visuals and the design elements standpoint, so image optimization, which Tom mentioned in the answer to that question, keeping images compressed and kind of choosing a smaller format to display them in, like WebP, as opposed to kind of a large PNG, is going to give you those faster load times without compromising on quality. So we're not kind of saying images are going to be pixelated and really blurry if you want your users to have a good experience. That's not the case. It more kind of relates to the way that they're delivered and how long it kind of takes them to load in. They won't kind of then appear visually worse. It's just all about kind of how they're loaded in. And then mobile usability and responsiveness, obviously kind of a non-negotiable from both this SEO standpoint and that sort of more user experience driven standpoint as well. The layout should obviously automatically adjust to the size of the user's device, no matter what kind of mobile device they're using, and also respond to their inputs correctly. So obviously just making sure that you have adequate spacing between the kind of tap targets of the buttons. So for example, a user should click on the button and it should respond. The tap target shouldn't be kind of off the button, for example. When the page rescales, everything should kind of rescale to be interactive as needed. Accessibility again, so this can change depending on if you're something like a visual, like a graphic design agency, for example. But like generally, whilst eye-catching colours are obviously fantastic and kind of draw the eye, users have to be able to read the text against the background. And the same obviously goes for kind of using flashy fonts. Like we want users to be able to read the content on the page. Because even if Google can, because it's kind of coded in, obviously, if the user can't interpret the content on the page, they're not likely to understand and take action based off it. Again, on the page layout side of things as well, the content path needs to be easy to follow with clearly defined sections, with kind of headings, and the content should kind of naturally flow based on what the user would want at the different stages, with calls to action at sort of strategically placed intervals to kind of guide the user journey so they're not lost on what to do when they reach a certain section, basically. And then just on the note of kind of code-heavy, flashy sort of themes that you might choose on certain builders. A flashy theme can obviously look great, but it can often obviously contribute to some of those slower load times and interactivity issues, especially if it's quite sort of plugin or interactive element heavy, for example, as well as issues with Google reading the content. So that's depending on obviously how it's kind of pulled in, and it refers to sometimes kind of things that you see where it says see more, for example, might be loaded in via JavaScript, and Google might not be able to read the content as easily. So it's kind of all about making sure that your content is legible by both the user and Google as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously it's kind of crucial as SEO is to any website. Sometimes it's just not the be all and end all for some brands, essentially. So I've gone down the route of brands because like design choices are obviously a very unique and sometimes personal decision. So one design might look really good on one brand, but not for another. So I'm going to look at what kind of sites could benefit from focusing more on design over SEO, really. So sometimes design and experience is a more important element for a brand, really. So let's look at when this might be the case. So if you've got a brand that's so well known, you can go all out for design, really, as SEO kind of won't be the priority. So an established brand is more likely to be found directly by name rather than being reliant on search. and therefore thinking about how to push the site up the rankings is just not a key focus point. And all of the efforts and kind of the value of the site can be pushed into focusing on design and user interactions and making a really stunning looking website. Next up, kind of thinking about the context of the site again. So if we're building, let's say, just a landing page, for example, so rather than to be found on it's not meant to be found on search really, and SEO then is not relied upon as a key traffic source. So our landing pages are all about conversions, and they're actively made not to rank. We stop that happening. So we want to go away and build something really nice and visually appealing that does the job that we want to do and getting our users to convert on these pages. I think Carla's obviously mentioned this before, but brand identity sometimes is just more of a priority. So visual brands, often in kind of the design, fashion or artistic sector, will focus more on their brand and the message that they're trying to get across to their users. They'll be aiming for kind of style over substance in a way, just getting something that looks amazing. Another brand that kind of might be a new brand that's trying to really make an instant and memorable impact with their users, rather than necessarily focusing on the long-term gains of SEO. So a new site launch may focus on creating this impression by visually impactful design, and then come to SEO their site actually later on in the process and try and make some marginal gains then. Then when we want the user to have more of an experience, we're going to direct users straight into the websites. We don't need them to rank. We don't need them to be found on search engines. We're going to give them the link, and we're going to make our users access them directly. For example, kind of let's say a membership site where you've signed up to something and then you get access to this website. It's more of a portal. It's an experience to be had rather than an experience to actually make people convert. And these are just some sites that might want to focus on design over SEO. It's not limited to this, but these are just a few examples that I thought might be quite interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. See, I think it's a really important point to make. I think whilst, from my perspective, I think, pretty much everybody here today attending will want to and should be aiming to achieve both of those things. There may be businesses out there, depending on budget or the stage you're at as a business, or just the type of business you are, that might need to focus on one more than the other. So thank you both for the food for thought there. So this is the last Q&A section. I appreciate we've slightly overrun, so we are going to look to wrap things up in the next few minutes. But if anyone does have any questions about the exceptions that we listed there, please pop it in the chat now. Otherwise, we will move on and conclude today's session. Yeah, okay, we'll move on. As I said, if you have a question or if you log off in a second and remember one that you wish you'd have asked, please do email marketing@seoworks.co.uk, and we'll chat to Tom and Carla and get a response typed up for you. So don't worry at all if you haven't thought one yet or we haven't managed to answer the one you've asked. They will all get answered. So yeah, as with all of the sessions we run here at the SEO Works, I'm really, really keen to make sure that everybody can kind of log off, go back to their desk or wherever they're going, and have in their mind the sort of key areas, those key messages that you want to say that you've taken away from the session. So what Tom's going to do now for us is just run through those kind of core bullet points for you to take home. And then, you can go back and watch the recording for the more in-depth things later on.
Yeah, so just a few key things to take away and hopefully have an understanding of from this session. So I still think it's important to understand that there is a misconception there that kind of visually appealing sites might sacrifice kind of technical performance and SEO effectiveness. And this is something that we're trying to prove wrong. And hopefully now you understand that there are ways to get around this. Secondly, kind of the design of a website and how crucial it is for brand perception and user trust, and kind of the influence it has on the initial impression that potential customers will have of your brand, and obviously understanding that the website is there to kind of tell your story. Obviously understanding the importance of organic ranking for visibility and ROI, with kind of half of our consumers starting their purchase journey on Google, and then their ability to eliminate the need for continuous ad spend is another important point to kind of remember. Obviously, we've talked about a load of techniques in this webinar, but if you can kind of just take away that the fact that there are techniques there from both an SEO and a UX perspective that can help alleviate like one's impact on the other. Obviously, just again being aware that there are things that we can do to try and balance out both. Obviously, the importance of structure, both from an SEO and a UX point of view and a technical point of view, and kind of the part and the role this plays in a high performing and a user friendly website. And then also just understanding the metrics that play a part in actually understanding UX and then SEO rankings, the things that we can do to measure these, the things that are actually in place to kind of give us the pointers of what's working and what isn't working really. And obviously our final reminder is that it is possible. You can have both a visually appealing website and one that does perform well in our search rankings.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Tom, there for rounding those points up. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody for joining today. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a slightly longer session than originally planned. We had some fantastic questions and it's just really difficult to not answer those. So yeah, please do stay in touch with us. So on the screen in a second, there's 2 QR codes here. So the top one there will take you to our website. On our website, there's a variety of different things. So you can find out how we can actually speak and help your business. So you can find out all about our SEO services, where you can work with experts like Carla on the technical SEO of your website. So a lot of things we talked about today, but also on the content side as well, which we also covered. And you can also find out about our website development and design services, of which Tom is a member. So we not only build and design custom WordPress sites, but we can also be your go-to developer resource for your website if it's built on WordPress. So a lot of those technical implementations and those fixes, if you're drawing a blank when you're trying to get those fixed, Tom and the team can help you with that. Also on the second QR code is our LinkedIn page. So that's where we put all of our insights. We've got short, quick guides. We share our blogs, all things like that. But also on our LinkedIn page, you can find out about our next webinar first. So we run these multiple times a year on a variety of different subjects. So if you go over there, you can find out about the one next. You can also subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, The Full Works, where you can get access to extra insights that aren't shared to our regular page followers. And finally, please do share your experience of today's webinar on your LinkedIn. The team put so much effort into preparing this content for people, and we really enjoy running these webinars. But that feedback and that positivity really helps us keep putting them on. So please do post about today's session on your LinkedIn and tag us in it, and we'll be happy to respond. So yeah, all that's left for me now is to say thank you very much for joining us again. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you at the next session.